So before we start the video, obviously, we have to address the elephant in the room. Yes, I got a piercing. It's crazy. It's a big change. Oh, and yeah, I shaved my head because I promised you all I would do it when I got to 9,000 subscribers. We're not quite there yet, but I figured if statistics are anything to go by, we might eventually get there sooner rather than later. So I'll just go ahead and get done with it. You know, I had time and energy, so I just went for it. But hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Plagued by Visions. My name is Juan, and I am the author of the short story collection Poking Holes. And now you might be wondering, Juan, why are you bringing that up so randomly? Well, because I realized that even though this came out like 2 months ago, I still haven't mentioned it in a video since its release. So that felt like a weird thing to not do. So yeah, I wrote a book and it's available on Amazon, and the link will be in the description. It's available in both paperback and ebook form, depending on where you are. I believe some places I don't think the paperback is available, but the Kindle ebook should be available anywhere. So yeah, if you want to check out some incredibly upsetting stories according to some people who have already read it, that is available for you to purchase. Is there anything else that I need to take care of before I get going with the video? Although the entire spirit of this particular video is this kind of housekeeping business, but yeah. Shout out to Carrie, wonderful viewer who sent me this pendant with a shark tooth in it, along with a bunch of other cool stuff as part of like this package that she sent my way as a birthday gift. My birthday was December 8th. So Carrie, thank you so much for being such a wonderful viewer, supporter of the show, and friend, and for the wonderful gifts. I really truly appreciate them. Thank you. All right, so we've gotten that out of the way, so now we can get into what this video is about. And as you see in the title, I have some really strange, some really weird, some really experimental books to tell you about. And these are all books that, for the most part, have been sent to me as copies for reviews. So that's where the housekeeping business comes in. I've read through these, but I've never actually reviewed them here on the channel, or some of them I haven't even brought them up. But these are wonderful works that, you know, the hardworking author sent my way with the hopes of me giving them, a fair review and discussion. So we're going to do that. I'm going to tell you to check them out because they were all ranging from pretty good to some of my favorite reads of 2022. So there's some definite great stuff in here, but even that stuff which I think won't really be appealing to a broad audience, to those who can really relish that weirdness and that experimental, transgressive, and rebellious edge to writing, I'm sure you will enjoy these for the most part. But I should also say some of these were not sent to me as review copies. Some of these I purchased with my own money, but I figured the style of the writing or the nature of it was very similar to the rest, in that it's really strange and unconventional, etc. So I figured I would pile them on here, and they are all from small presses, or they're all independently published by the author. So there's that cohesiveness to the theme as well. But yes, we're gonna get through these. I'm gonna let you know what I loved about them. If there was anything that I didn't like about it, we'll also discuss that. But more so than, giving you a review in terms of this is how good it was with the star rating and all, I'm just telling you, go ahead and check these out. I think that they're all, like I said, at least pretty good, and they were all written, like I said, by these independent authors, or authors being published through small presses, authors that are working doubly hard, on top of being full-time students or full-time employees, or sometimes even both, because some of them are incredibly hardworking like that. Even on top of that, being dedicated to their passion and in the art of writing and putting out these works, and being daring, like I said, being kind of like in that rebellious edge, and just letting their ideas flow freely, no matter how weird or not commercially appealing they might be. There's so much effort, there's so much passion, and there's so much trippy shit to be found in this pile that I'll be presenting to you. So yeah, go ahead. If any of them grab your attention, even if you're not sure, check it out. Give it a chance. Support these people. They're all amazing. So yeah, let's go. So I should say again, some of them were review copies, some of them were not. And as I get into the books, I will be letting you know which are which. So this was sent to me as a review copy by the author. This is a collection of poetry titled Brother Sleep by Aldo Amparán, and I believe this is the author's first published collection, and they just randomly reached out to me because they felt like the collection had these tinges and notes and themes that were sort of in tune with the kind of stuff that we like to explore here. So I said, sure, I'll check it out. And not really expecting anything, I read through this in one sitting, and it ended up being one of my favorite reads from this year. Like I said, it's just a collection of poetry, and there is this theme of reflection, of memory, of looking back, which is something, that poetry sort of tends to lend itself to, because poetry is just so compressed, in the form of thought, and it kind of does reflect the form of memory a little bit. It's just some vivid images or tinges or passages here and there that sort of reawaken some kind of distant or abstract time and place. So it's in tune with that, that process of remembering. But what I particularly enjoyed about this is that marriage of language and memory that we see here, because it is mostly reflecting on previous experiences in the author's life. And of course, I don't have any authority to say how much of it is autobiographical, how much of it is fiction, and poetry does tend to blur those lines as well, which I always enjoy. And so there's no way of telling, between fact and fiction in that rigid sense, but all of it speaks with this really visceral, affect-laden reality. And like I said, that process of recollecting, of remembering things about family, about childhood, all of these things where our language wasn't really developed, far to define some of these things that we go through in these younger years. And I believe that fracture of memory and language is something that I really, really identified with, because in my adult life is when I started to study, higher education here in the US is when I actually learned this kind of specialized language with dealing with the subject of memory, of recollection, of identity, of learning to define and identify your own culture, all of that. This is all language that we learn at a later age. So I found it incredibly daring and moving for Amparán to sort of have this dedication to exploring memory, a space in our lives where this language did not exist, and where the things that happened to us, the experiences that we went through, had ill definitions to them or no definitions at all. It's all sort of like very muted and hard to describe, but going with the language of the present to sort of define experiences of the past, and the painful injury covered labor that is. It's all felt so vividly here. This was incredible. This was amazing. The form, the style of it, the passages, some word choices just really sort of like smelling salts, shaking you awake. It's incredible. It's incredible. This is incredible. This is one of the best poetry collections that I have ever read. So I recommend it thoroughly. That's all I have to say. But be ready. It made me cry. I don't know if it'll have the same effect on you, but be warned. And now up next, I'm going to tell you about Dog Meat by Priscilla Bettis. And Priscilla Bettis is a very, very special person here in Plagued by Visions. Of course, I don't know if many of you would be familiar with the name, but she is a big supporter of the booktip community. She's someone who's always watching and commenting on videos and engaging with the community. She is amazing. So when she reached out to me and told me that she had written a book and that she wanted to send it to me for a review, and also on top of that telling me that it covered subject matter that is not necessarily overtly transgressive and graphic and explicit, but does have tinges of that. When I heard all of that, I was like, I'm in. Send me a copy. And I must say, I forgot to take pictures and all that, but because I was just so excited to get to the book. But this came in like this really amazingly packaged parcel where it was wrapped up as if it was, a piece of meat at the butcher. So wonderful touch there, I must say. So this is a novella, and then it's written. It's sort of like I wouldn't call it horror, sci-fi, dystopian, that kind of style, but it is also kind of like adventurous and whimsical and absurd and all of these things. The premise is basically that this one guy, Kalb, lives in a society where everybody is measured by these tests that place you on sort of like the social hierarchy, and the lower you place, the lower in that hierarchy you are. And having scored a very low score, Kalb is given the undesirable job of slaughtering dogs to farm their meat for eating, for human consumption. And it's sort of like it becomes a story of like trying to break away from like this destiny of having some form of reckoning with this dystopian kind of like hierarchical structure in the society, and you learn about, you know, the characters' past and their relationships, and how these relationships have been fractured by the way that this system is arranged, etc. So it was a really fascinating premise. I felt that it was worked with a lot of emotion, a lot of heart, and especially reading about how it's based on real life scenarios. You know, the people have lived through societies like this somewhere like in China, where these kinds of tests do exist, these kinds of like rigid social hierarchies do exist, these kinds of, you know, undesirable labors that people are forced to perform, they do exist. All of that, you know, I felt like, well, I didn't feel like it was explored as incisively and with as much nuance as a work of course, like nonfiction would necessitate in exploring some of these real life ills and troubles. That was not the labor that was being attempted here at all. Of course, it was more just a really heartfelt, quirky story. There was a kind of humor here that I was not expecting, and there's a lot of glee, and there's a lot of heart that really contrasts with the bleak and horrid nature of its premise. But you know, it's kind of like not anything too wild in terms of overturning, you know, the archetypes and conventions of the genre of, you know, dystopia. You know, nothing too unusual in that sense, but still coming from a place with a lot of heart, with a lot of passion and investment, I felt like this story was very, very well written. It flowed nicely. It had a nice payoff, I felt, at the end. And of course, the premise was disturbing. There is animal death. There's the quintessence of animal death in here, of course. So if that bothers you, this is probably not for you. But it is not gratuitous, or it is not exploitative, or it doesn't embellish the detail in that sense. It's more a story. It's more a character study on a really likable and heartbreaking character, and a really heartbreaking story. Overall, I thought it was great, you know, as kind of like an early effort of this up-and-coming author. You know, the fact that I was able to get through it is often a good sign. But beyond that, I had a great time reading it, and I'm always glad to pick up something and read something that makes me go, you know, I can honestly say I had never read anything that touched on a premise like this before, and in this fashion. So yeah, Dogmeat by Priscilla Bettis. It is now out for you to purchase, so give it a shot if it interests you. All right, up next is another book that I received as a review copy, and this one is from Craig Buchner, and this is his short story collection, Brutal Beasts. Now, Craig Buchner reached out to me over on Instagram, and when I heard the way that this was described, you know, it's not necessarily transgressive fiction, again, like the kind of brutal and explicit works that we are familiar with around here. So you're not going to get that. You're not going to get Edward Lee. You're not going to get that vein of transgression, but this is interesting because it's very anecdotal, right? A lot of it I found as I was reading through it, a lot of it is told from the first person, and a lot of it is self-reflective. In fact, I don't even know if maybe all of it is told in the first person. Probably not. I shouldn't make sweeping claims like that, but of course, very reflective, and the subjectivity behind that perspective, I felt really amps up the disquieting nature of some of its premises, because I felt like, and I went through this as well when I was writing my own short story collection, that first person perspective really works, especially when you're covering something of like a less savory kind, really works as a kind of blinder or like a limiter. Right, it's only that one sort of tenuous, frail, and of questionable sanity. You know, that one small perspective that you get, and there's horrors happening at the periphery, but they can only be digested through that one single, isolated perspective. And that's something that I felt thoroughly in this book. There's an isolation of like a kind of like spiritual kind or psychological kind, and there's, like I said, brutality. There's really bleak tragedy. There's really off-putting kind of perversions of relationships that are supposed to be tender and passionate, and there's all this overturning of comfort going on through here, but it's very subtle, it's very quiet. It's this very limited perspective, this very limited first-person voice that's only sort of faintly reacting to these horrible and disconcerting things going on, and it's like that throughout. And the opening story, the one that the collection gets its title from, Made by Brutal Beasts, by far my favorite of the collection. So incredible the way that it explores something that is just so emotionally loaded. It's a story about welcoming a first child, and this young couple is having their first kid, but the wife is going through the normal changes that a person goes through when they're pregnant, or is she? Are they normal changes? Is the husband underreacting, or is he overreacting? Are his reactions, do they speak to a madness of his own, or is this just how any normal person would react? It's that kind of like frail, like I said, tenuous reality that we get from such a personal account, where you don't really know, you don't really have a stable footing. And then on top of that, Craig Buchner throws really, really horrible things our way, disconcerting things that are hard to digest and hard to make sense of sometimes. This was amazing. I liked it a lot. It was incredible. Craig Buchner is absolutely a name that I'm going to be sort of on the lookout for from now on. And curiously, I would be curious to see what he could do if he took on, of course, like more of like a long form premise, but also something that was more directly transgressive, because there are hints, there are tinges of violence and brutality in here, or kind of like the echoes of or afterthoughts of it, but in something more direct, with sort of like that precise and steady prose that he has. I wonder what he could do, and I'm excited, to say the least, to see what he will do next. But yes, Brutal Beast by Craig Buchner was pretty great. All right, now this next one is one of the, I believe, three books on this pile that was not sent to me as a review copy. I purchased this with my own money because I wanted to check it out, but I ended up reading it and loving it, and again, found it to be very, very in the same vein as everything else that we're discussing here. But this is Generation Bloodbath by Paul Curran, and this is from Apocalypse Party, which is, for those of you who are familiar with my channel, one of my favorite small presses out there. They are publishing mind-bending horror and experimental, dark and vicious fiction that no one else would ever put out, I feel, or even touch, but they're finding this really beautiful aestheticized kind of chaos behind these works, and they have a really, really cohesive catalog, and it's incredible. Blah, 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 blah. But yeah, Generation Bloodbath is one of their newest releases. I believe it just came out last month or 2 months ago. Paul Curran is a name that has been brought up on this channel before because of his other work, Left Hand, which was part of my Most Disturbing Books series. It was quite appalling, quite transgressive, like I said, both in content and in form. And it's the same thing with this. This is written in a bunch of basically numbered aphorisms, but it does tell a story. But that story is really, really sort of difficult to draw out or keep a steady hold on. But it doesn't matter, because Paul Curran, that is possibly the least of his concerns. But it's so fascinating. It's like you're microdosing a horror novel. That's what it feels like. It's like you have an eyedropper of transgression, and you're sort of like letting the drops fall slowly into your eyeball one by one, and by the end of it, you've gone blind and you're bleeding out of your fucking eye sockets. But it's just so appalling. I think Paul Curran is one of the most rebellious writers writing today that I have come across. I'm sure there's more out there, but I still haven't found them. But if you know of any of them, please tell me of them, like right now. This is amazing. I mean, you still get, like, it's sort of like the faint ghost, the faint outline of what the story is. It's a story of, there's dystopia, there's injustice, there's oppression, there's pining for revenge, there's pining for this kind of broken sense of justice, there's a bunch of fucking death and guts and brutal gore and all kinds of things imaginable. But like I said, it's not tethered to this conventional form. It's just it's numbered, so it kind of feels like it's rigid by the numbers, literally transgression, one by one, this prickling of deviant thoughts comes pulsating out. But it's so amazing how Paul Curran, even in such an unconventional, hard to digest form, finds a way to get the full brunt of transgression to come across, right? It still packs that sucker punch that we're so used to with disturbing fiction of this kind, but it's delivered through a completely unique and just highly disconcerting what you would call it, form or style. And it's fascinating. It's just like you're reading it, and the numbered nature of it is just so hypnotic. So your eyes just keep jumping on and on and on, sentence aphorism after aphorism, and you're sort of ingesting all of these mentions of blood in particular. I feel like I was going through some kind of like MK Ultra brainwashing experiment or something, like shaved head and everything. But it's just this resounding pounding of ideas that is sort of like insidiously and subliminally injected into your mind, where you're reading and you're not really noticing it, but your brain is starting to go blood, 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 and then by the end of it, it's all you can think of. Paul Curran grabbed my brain and threw it into a blender, and he pressed the fastest setting, and I thank him for it. Really, I mean, thank you, sir, thank you. All right, this other book also sent to me, not as a review request, but I still want to talk about it because I thought it was amazing, and because this author has now sent me 2 of their books, and the other one I will not be talking about on this video because it's gonna get an entire video of its own, because it was one of my favorite reads of 2022, one of my favorite reads, period, one of the most mind-altering works of art that I have ever witnessed. That'll be coming soon, but I should still mention that in this video, so just so that you get the hype and maybe you go out and get yourself a copy right now. It was VITIATORS by Elytron, Frass, and Charles N. But Elytron Frass, who was the one that reached out to me and said, would you review VITIATORS? And I said, yeah, that looks amazing. Later on, sent me their other book, Liber, Exuvia. Now, let me give you an accurate recreation of my experience opening this up and reading it for the first time. So I was kind of just paging through it, and then just kind of kept going, and then kind of got like 2/3 of the way through, and then I realized, oh wait, I was trying to like skip the table of contents, but it's mostly a table of contents, but it's not. It's more of a list. But that's the person. That's like sort of like the first-hand view that you get of it, right? You would think, okay, this is supplemental, sort of like this is an appendix, right? This is a guide. This is not the actual book, but that's where the book lies. That's where the story lies, and then we get other cool stuff. Amazing art in here, I must say. I'm not going to show you too much because if you want to see it, you're going to have to go and buy it. But yeah, this the first thing that made me think of was, well, a table of contents is like this ephemeral, marginal thing that we see in a book that we're sort of conditioned through our years of reading to ignore, right? It's not something that we would pay any substantial attention to. And the fucking nerve and the fucking courage of Elytron Frass to write a story that is largely sort of formatted in this really frail and often ignored form, right? So it's fascinating to me that there's an entirety of transgression and mystery and intrigue and thrill and fascination. There is sort of like a semi-conventional story, but it's being told in this way that sort of screams, it's an art form that lives in the unconventional, the unwieldy, the marginal, right? The things that we have a difficult time sort of bringing ourselves to consider substantially. It was incredible. And then the art, I mean, eye candy to fucking spare in here. And the reading experience of it is quite something, because it's like, what is that term that I'm trying to think of? There is a term in visual art to describe something sort of like an after image, or like a leftover image of an old painting, and I can't remember what the name of it is. Anyway, I'm sure I'll remember it while I'm editing it, and I'll put it up on the screen. But it's very much that. It's kind of like you're beating through the pages, and you're trying to like grab onto anything, right? And it doesn't necessarily always work, and it's not necessarily always successful in that way. So this wasn't my favorite. VITIATORS, miles, eons ahead of this, in my opinion. But still, it was a fascinating experience to sort of beat your eyes going from number to number, from numbered sentence to numbered sentence, and for me, it kind of felt like, this droning action where not really anything was sticking particularly. I wasn't really following the thread of any particular story, but an after image, sort of like a faint ghost of something, of like a kind of like a structure of a story, was remaining in my mind. And I'm totally convinced, having read VITIATORS, knowing how Elytron Frass has this mastery over form, I'm so convinced that it is intentional to sort of get this aftertaste of a novel out of this. That's what it is. It's not really a novel, it's more like an aftertaste. But it's incredibly fascinating, unconventional as hell. If you're into that sort of shit, you need to this is definitely a name that you need to keep in your mind. Now, these last two that are left that I still have to get through, these are ones that were not sent to me as review copies. I got these with my own money, but I still want to talk about them because it just feels right. And one of them is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, not the Tobe Hooper film, but the novel work of nonfiction, film theory, long form essay, autobiographical, experimental poetry, pastiche. I don't know. I don't even know why I threw the word pastiche in there. It just sounded fancy. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre by Josiah Morgan. Now, this is a work, like I said, of all the things that I just mentioned. Mostly, it's film theory concerning Tobe Hooper's filmography and sort of like an overall survey of his work. But Josiah Morgan uses this film theory essay writing of Tobe Hooper's filmography as a sort of parallel or a starting point in order to cover confessional and autobiographical aspects of his writing as well. So it's kind of like a work of memoir and also autobiography, autofiction, and film theory, all of it married into one. So it's a fascinating take. It's for me, it was kind of like a mixed bag. I mean, the reading, jumping between these two modes of narrative was not jarring at all. It felt like it really flowed smoothly, and I felt like the marriage of form at least was successful. But the actual content, I don't know. I felt like, as a big Tobe Hooper fan myself, I felt like not many new things were being said about the filmography, and they didn't really reveal any particularly illuminating or moving or fascinatingly original takes on autobiography and autofiction either. It just kind of felt like very by the numbers, that kind of experimental film theory. But like I said, for it to be a successful marriage of these two very unconventional forms that you wouldn't ever think could be successfully married, that shows deft expertise with form and style. And so that compels me to say that, whatever other thing that Josiah Morgan decides to put out, it will most definitely be within my radar, whether it be more committed to the nonfiction film theory aspect of things or the more confessional autofiction side of things. It was a really great, masterful experiment in form. And the writing, while exploring ideas that I felt were a bit on the trite side sometimes, the writing is still great. So yeah, this is something that, I gave it a shot, found it wasn't for me, but I came away thinking this author is definitely someone that I want to keep exploring, whatever else may come our way from their bibliography. So yeah, there's that. And now the final one is Pornography for the End of the World by Brendan Vidito. And first of all, can we just look at that? You're gonna get me demonetized over here, Brendan. Because Brendan is actually in the author has been published. This was published through Weird Punk Books. And I should say, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was published through Amphetamine Sulfate, who also published The Magician by Christopher Zeischek, which I have mentioned was another one of my favorite reads from this year. So there's another small press to keep an eye out for. But so is a Weird Punk Books. They also put out some great stuff, and this is one of them. I love this. Brendan, I would say he's a friend. I would call him a friend. Maybe he wouldn't call me a friend, but I'll call him a friend. And he was actually someone who I consulted and actually helped me out with my short story Poking Holes, which eventually became part of the collection Poking Holes. So he was actually, his support and him extending help and advice in writing to me was actually crucial in getting my book rolling and eventually published. So I'm very indebted to him. And I also very much admire him as a writer. I think he is fantastic. And I think that his particular fixations with grotesquerie are just so original and inventive. And there's that edge of eroticism to so much of his writing that I just totally admire. I have previously read another collection of his, Nightmares in Ecstasy, and now this, his second collection, Pornography for the End of the World. I felt this might sound like a bad thing, but I don't mean it as a bad thing at all. It's more of the same as in Nightmares in Ecstasy, but my impulse is to say, why fix what isn't broken? You know, there's the same preoccupations with viscera, body horror, lots of really unconventional, depraved, and empty, gut-wrenching sex. Gut-wrenching is just not an adjective you ever want to put to sex. But behold, yeah, it's amazing how you know, this kinds of explorations of like that juncture between what's grotesque and what's beautiful and what's arousing, what's revolting, and how sort of seamless they become when they're at the hands of like a master of aestheticizing grotesquerie, as I would describe Brendan. It's just so hypnotic to sort of see the debauchery and the gore and all the vivid sort of like day glow of violence and blood sort of unfold, and sort of like the parasitical nature of some of the, you know, horrors found in here. In particular, my God, I mean, when it comes to paying an homage to David Cronenberg and Clive Barker, I could think of fewer names than this. I mean, this just truly embraces that philosophy of pain and pleasure and deformity that we find in the works of those two, you know, in a way that doesn't feel derivative, but rather feels like it's, and this is what I mean by, you know, it's not a bad thing at all, that it's just more of the same. I just feel like Brendan has tapped into this vein of really gnarly and original body horror, and you know, has broken it open, and it's just sort of like flowing out in this fountain of blood and gore, and Brendan's just sort of like relishing the wetness of it and seeing how many more depraved stories can rise out of that. So it's like he's found his own unique substance of horror writing, and he is working it within an inch of its life. So this is amazing. So those are the strange and unusual books that I have received, either, you know, out of my own accord. I went out and purchased them, brought them in out of my own free will, or they were sent to me by some lovely people who truly astounded me with the passion and originality behind some of their work. So yeah, please, if any of these even just sort of remotely interest you, please go and check them out. If you can get yourself a copy, it really is worth it. I recommend all of these. Even the ones that I said might not have necessarily been for me, they might still be for you. So yeah, that's all there is for today. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you're all well. Continue to stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.